Hey everyone, welcome. I hope this is working. I'm trying out a couple of new things. I can see people in the chat. Great to see people already here. Hello and welcome. I hope my video is coming across properly. I hope my audio is coming across properly. Let me know if there is a problem. Sleepy Reader is here. Benjamin, Bobby the PS2, welcome. Good to see all of you over here. I'm going to try one thing that I tried last time and I couldn't quite get it to work. And this time, I don't think I can get it to work either for some reason. I was trying to pop the chat out, which is a little difficult to do in this thing that I'm using. I know it's easy on StreamYard, and I see people do it all the time. It's a built-in feature there, but I can't get it to work over here for some reason. I was trying to use a particular... Anyway, you don't care. That's not what you're here for. Let's get to talking about what we are here for. I'm going to make sure that it doesn't accidentally pop up. Comics versus the World is here. ZT is here. Hello. Comics versus the World says he'll watch back later. Ashwita is in the chat. She'll be moderating it. Not that these chats ever really need any moderation. Welcome to the live stream. It seems like it's been a while since I've been live. I've actually had a break from YouTube in the middle. I've made a video recently, a nice long 30-minute one that took me a long time to make, and I made a couple of short videos that I've been wanting to make. Architectural foam panels and columns, welcome. Very good to see you here, sir. Daniel Pizarro, Yono, having a great day. Yes, I am. Now that I am live. It's been a tough week. It's been a tough couple of weeks, but I really enjoy making videos on comics, but they take a lot of effort and they take a lot of setup, particularly because I'm not very skilled at the things I do, so I'm very inefficient. But I like talking about comics. I know all of you like talking about comics, and I wanted to talk about Usagi Yojimbo, which, if you are not familiar, is one of my favorite comic series of all time. There are a number of Usagi Yojimbo fans out there, but there are equally a number of people out there who are not familiar with this comic at all. Some people may be familiar with Usagi's the characters' appearances in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Some people may be aware of the Netflix TV show that has just come on. That's sort of a spin-off based around Usagi things. But the Usagi Yojimbo comic is extremely popular and at the same time not popular enough, in my opinion. I think it's one of the most fantastic comics ever made. It's been running for well over 30 years. I think it might be approaching 40 years now. And it's an incredibly consistent comic. It is great storytelling. It is fantastic comics. And it is that over and over and over again, issue after issue, arc after arc, trade paperback, volume, whichever way you're reading it. I don't think I know of any other comic that is as consistently great as Usagi Yojimbo, which is not to say that everything in the series, especially for something that has the number of issues that it does and has been running for the time that it's been running, doesn't have parts that aren't as good as the others. But that's completely relative. It's all by its own standards. So the dizzying heights, as it were, that it reaches at certain stories, at certain points of time, may not be things that you will have over and over again. But even, I would say, the worst, never have quotation marks been more required. Even the worst Usagi Yojimbo stories are terrific stories. But what I want to talk about is one particular, and I've made a number of Usagi Yojimbo videos on this channel. If you're not familiar with this comic at all, you could check those videos out. I have one called What is Usagi Yojimbo, which is an introduction to the series. I have a video, how to get started reading Usagi Yojimbo, 3 different strategies that you could try, which is kind of outdated or has swung back to being relevant again, because I was talking about things that were out of print, and then for a brief while things were in print and available, and now they may be out of print again. But I do think that it's more easily available to read today than it was at the time that I had made that video, which is great. And I know that Usagi Yojimbo is continuing as a series even today with IDW. Its 4th actually fifth publisher. The series is creator owned, written and drawn by Stan Sakai, lettered by Stan Sakai. And he has moved from Fantagraphics to Mirage to Dark Horse and now to IDW with Usagi Yojimbo. And today I want to talk about one particular aspect of Usagi Yojimbo, which is the pacing, which is one of the hundreds of reasons why it's a great comic series. And I want to do it by talking about a single issue I love, which is a series of videos, if you're not familiar, that I make on and off. And the last video I made was also a single issue I love on an issue of the Teen Titans. So I want to talk about one issue. I'm trying a couple of different things in order to do this correctly. So let's see if I can show you. Yes, there we go. There, we're going to talk about this issue, which is Usagi Yojimbo Volume 2, number 11. But of course, since it's me, I am not going to talk only about that one in order to make whatever point I'm hoping to make. I'm going to be talking about a couple of different issues, some issues that precede it. So I've got 9, 10, and 11 here. And honestly speaking, I could have just gone for 8. In fact, I do have 8 back there in case I change my mind and decide to talk about 8 as well. So we'll be talking about a couple of different issues. But I don't think this is only for people who read Usagi Yojimbo. In fact, it might actually be quite basic or redundant for people who are quite familiar with this. The things I want to say about them might not amount to more than, wow, that's amazing, and I love it. But I do want to show these comics. I do want to talk about these stories. And I think even if you're not familiar with Usagi Yojimbo, you'll enjoy this look. At least that's my hope. And the reason why that's my hope is because Usagi Yojimbo, the reason I am confident is because Usagi Yojimbo, as I've said before, is also one of the most inviting to new readers comics that I have ever read, that I've ever seen. It is incredibly accessible, not just because of its brilliant art and writing, but because of its plotting and because of its story structure constantly loops as it moves forward. There are flashbacks, there are things that are being filled in, there is lore of the region and the time, but also of the individual characters. And you very often go back and forth in time and very often follow different characters. So the story is really filled in at different times. So it doesn't matter if you're reading volume 3, you might get a flashback to Usagi's childhood. And that's the first time any reader is seeing that story of his childhood. So chronology and continuity, I mean, of course, there are certain things that matter, but chronology and continuity for the most are not the prime focus of Usagi Yojimbo. It is chronological. It does have a story that holds up. It's not rebooting itself and it's not contradicting itself. As I said, it's incredibly consistent, and it's consistency includes that consistency in the world that it's creating and the rules and the story and the history. But the story can be jumped into at any point of time. You can read things out of order in a way in this series, which I think you can do with many comics, but with this series more than any other. And I think you can pick up almost any volume of Usagi Yojimbo, and as I will talk about soon, almost any issue of Usagi Yojimbo, and have a great time as a new reader. And that is also going to be part of what I want to talk about as far as the pacing of these comics. Perfect, it's for a noob like me. Yes, I think it should be, because part of what I think about Usagi Yojimbo that I was talking about is like not enough people read it, is I wish people would just pick up whatever they want, whatever they can find. So sometimes I find that people, they like to start at volume 1, and that's fine. I completely understand. I'm that way about many things. But there are certain things where you don't have to start at volume 1 if it's not available to you. You can start maybe at volume 4. Maybe the story has a particular, and readers and fans of the series will be able to guide you with that. And I think sometimes the fact that Usagi Yojimbo has been running for more than 30 years, and the fact that there are so many different volumes and different editions and different publishers out there, can be intimidating to people. They don't know whether they can pick up this thing that they're seeing on a bookstore shelf or online. They don't know if they can pick it up and read it without having read that other stuff. And I think that keeps people, with Usagi Yojimbo and maybe other comics, the number of volumes, the amount of work out there, that keeps people from trying them. So my goal, as it were, is to say, don't worry, just jump in, just pick anything you want, and that's what I'm going to do today. So, is there anything else I wanted to say before I got started? All right, yeah, I'm trying a couple of different things. As I said, I've got a different sort of setup over here, and I've finally got two cameras because I've always wanted to show comics, and I've wanted to show what they look like. Well, so I've been trying to get this set up for a while, but there are a couple of issues with this. One, because of this setting, I'm running this main camera, on batteries. So usually I have like a sort of power setup so I can just keep going. And I think my record on live streams is I have a live stream that was 3 hours and 45 minutes long. So this is not going to be anywhere near that long because my batteries aren't going to last that long. I do have some spares, but they are backup batteries. I was using them for testing, so I don't know how long they'll last. So I'm on an automatic timer already because this camera is not going to last for very long. This one is on some power thing, so but I can't change it. Look at me. So that's one thing. And the other thing is because of the way that this is set up, because of these cameras, this one, I don't know if you care about the technical details, but it doesn't have what's called a clean HDMI out. And in order to get the picture to look like this and not like full of camera menu stuff like that, I've had to remove a number of things, but it's also on manual focus. It's not on autofocus, which is what I like to use because I move the comics up and down. So because it's on manual focus, I'll be a little finicky. I'll have to try to focus it if I move the comic up and down. So I'm just apologizing ahead of time for all of this. And I'm just going to look through the comments to see if there's anything that I missed. Great to see everyone else here. Matthew, good to see you. DS Paw, Dragon Bellow Conspirator. Yes, this is a really interesting topic. What is one's favorite Usagi Yojimbo storyline? And I think with fans of the series who've read the whole thing, it'll be very, very different depending on who you ask. But the fact that there are so many, I mean, I know Grasscutter gets called out a lot, and I'll talk about Grasscutter a little bit, but I really think that there are so many stories that one could pick as the best story, depending on whether you want to go for the arcs, whether you want to go for the short stories, and that's a good way to start. Usagi Yojimbo is, in my opinion, as perfectly paced as it is, because I mean the sense I have of it is that way because it's paced perfectly at almost every level. And by that I mean that the stories of Usagi Yojimbo can be one-shots. In fact, another thing about Usagi Yojimbo is it's one of those series that if you pick up a single issue, there is a good chance it's a one-shot. There's a good chance that it's a self-contained story. There'll be characters and situations, etc., obviously, that are part of the world and continuity. But as far as an arc of any one story is concerned, there's a very high chance that it will be there contained in one issue. There is an equal chance that it'll be a two-parter. And there's also a good chance it'll be a three-parter, and there's a good chance that it'll be a four-parter. Anything longer than that, I think, is much rarer. And even a four-parter is every now and then, it's kind of a major event. And I think we had more of those in the earlier and middle years. And I think later you've got a lot more focus on single issues that push the story forward chapter by chapter, but are still self-contained. But the point is, because of the variety in its presentation of various stories, and that's part of that accessibility, because of that, it becomes an incredible juggling act. Because if you are creating one-shots, how do you cater to people who are reading it in continuity all the time and have been following it for years? How do you give them growth? How do you give them more? How do you give them rewards for not being someone who just picked up a single issue? How do you get to the meaty stuff that we like? And how do you get to character growth? How do you get to plot machinations and complications if you're doing that? And if you have extremely long stories in which multiple characters from various parts of history come together, how do you cater to someone who's just picking this up and has no idea who these people are or what their past experiences and shared adventures have been? And that juggling act, again, is not done better than anyone, I think, than Stan Sakai in Usagi Yojimbo. He has an impeccable way of presenting information that is new and introductory and warm and embracing, as well as having a very finessed presentation of anything that has come before. What that means is if you're familiar and you're reading it, you don't feel like you're getting a recap and now you have to wait for a couple of pages to go over stuff that you already know. It's done in quick reference, it's done in quick allusion, and you know exactly where that fits in. And it's so slight that if you're a new reader and you haven't read that thing, it's not interrupting you. It's not telling you that now you're not going to understand it. It just tells you that this is something that happened then. That kind of balancing act, I think, is very impressive. I think when you have a two-part story, how do you create, and these are, single issues, the American single issues, so 32 pages, but very often Usagi Yojimbo, because they're completely written, drawn, lettered by one person, there are 20 pages, about 20 to 22 pages of story, and then you may have a backup. There are, at least in these issues, no ads that I can see, so it's all story from first page to last. There might be ads at the end, but not in the middle of the issues. So this is a lot of storytelling that gets packed into 20 issues, but at the same time has to be rewarding as a single read, but it has to have some continuity. It has to have some weight that moves it along. So the issue that I want to talk about is number 11 from the Mirage years. So Mirage was where Usagi Yojimbo went after Fantagraphics, and in Mirage, I think in Fantagraphics, Usagi Yojimbo was there for 28 issues. In Mirage, Usagi Yojimbo was only there for 16 issues before moving to Dark Horse, where it was there for hundreds of issues before moving just a couple of years ago to IDW, as I said. The interesting thing about the Mirage comics is that they are in color. Now, today, Usagi Yojimbo in IDW is being printed and published in color, and I know that there are classic stories that were originally in black and white in Fantagraphics or Dark Horse, and they are being recolored and being created, but this is part of the original run. So this Fantagraphics had some color specials. So I think there were 4 color specials, but Usagi Yojimbo has always otherwise been a black and white comic, except for this period. This is when Usagi Yojimbo was in color for every issue, for every story, for these 16 issues. Now, the interesting thing is, and this is what I've read online, I'm not 100% sure if that's the... I have heard that the color plates or the color of these stories, the files, and this is before digital printing, of course, the files were lost or destroyed. And so therefore that color could not be reproduced. So when we see this story next, it will be in black and white. I don't know if that's true. These stories, the Mirage stories, are part of the Usagi Yojimbo saga volumes brought out by Dark Horse, either in these paperbacks or those limited edition hardcovers. So Usagi Yojimbo Saga Volume 1 starts with the Mirage issues and then moves on to the Dark Horse issues. The Fantagraphics, and I've made a video and other people have videos on this. The Fantagraphic stories are not part of the Usagi Yojimbo Saga, but the Mirage stories are. So because this collects the entire Mirage run and then moves on to Dark Horse, you will get all 16 of those stories in here, but they will be in black and white. Now, I don't know if that's because the files were lost or if these were always going to be in black and white. The color specials, for example, are reproduced in black and white, but they were also redrawn, or Tomoe's story was redrawn at least. But this is, this is getting too far into the weeds. If you want to read these stories and you can't get your hands on the Mirage singles, which actually were quite easy to get. They weren't very hard to find. They weren't very expensive, and I consider them a steal because they're very good quality. They got glossy covers, as you can see with the lighting being affected over here. But all of these stories are available in Usagi Yojimbo Saga Volume 1. So if you wanted to read them, that's one place you can go. They're also collected in various trade paperbacks as the Usagi as the Usagi stories have. But again, in the trade paperbacks, I believe that all the trade paperbacks that came out collecting the Mirage comics were again in black and white, not in the original color that they were published in. So until these stories get colorized by IDW, if IDW picks any of the Mirage stories to do, this is the only way that I know of to read these stories in the colors, the original single issues. None of the collections, I think, have them. But if I'm wrong about that, please correct me in the comments or in the chat. I feel like I always do live streams by myself, so I'm always talking at length, and then I'm never really sure if things are making any sense or connecting, but it's good. I'm glad to see that the overhead setup is working for people. Scan Butterly says, I bought the Fantagraphics Usagi set, and I'll read them. I'll continue with the saga. After Bone, yeah, well, you can't go wrong. Bone and then Usagi Yojimbo is a great journey, I think. Grasscutter, yes, they were colored in the Mirage years. It's one of those. It's one of those interesting things about Usagi Yojimbo. All right, so let's talk about pacing. Yeah, Bobby says it might take a while for the colorization to get to the Mirage years. That's true. But they're not colorizing everything. So they're picking their stories. So what were they, like 28 issues or 29 issues in the Fantagraphics thing? If they only pick 3 or 4 volumes to do, they might get to the Mirage years faster. They might do the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles crossover that the Mirage years start with. That would be smart, I would think. All right, so pacing. One of the questions that I obviously had for myself was, what do you mean by pacing? Because it can mean so many different things, and I'm thinking particularly over here, I think obviously about comics. So I'm not thinking about pacing the way I would think about pacing in prose or in film or music or things like that. Comics pacing, but of course it borrows or it has overlaps with what we think of in prose and movies, because we are, of course, talking about stories. At the same time, I wanted to find there is this notion that pacing also depends on expectations. And I think that's about the judgment of pacing. How you think something was paced invariably has to do with how you thought it should be paced. And what your expectations are based on, I think also should be considered. So I think genre has a lot to do with pacing. Whether that's fair or not, I don't know, but I do know that people find things interestingly paced sometimes because it's a subversion of genre. So if your genre is an action movie, say, if you would expect the pace to be a rapid pace. So a slow-paced action movie, and there are some, might draw attention to itself. It might have something interesting to do and say, or it might be indulgent and not understand what it's trying to do. These are very subjective sort of things, and they do shift. So when I think about comic spacing, I do think about the comics craft. Like, what is it doing on a panel by panel, page by page basis, chapter by chapter, or issue by issue basis? That has a lot to do with pacing. And as many of you will know, I'm not really a single issues reader. I read trade paperbacks of things that get published originally in single issues, or I read what's referred to as graphic novels, standalone one volume reads, things like that. So when I've thought about pacing in comics, I've generally thought about it from the long form volume read point of view. But as I realized, that's obviously not true. Even when you read newspaper comics, you have a certain pacing. You have an expectation of the 3-panel strip or the 4-panel strip. If it's a Sunday strip, you've got a sense of that pacing. You know the pacing of Calvin and Hobbes is going to be different from the pacing of Peanuts. And I mean, they teach you that to a certain extent, but it's also determined by the form. So it's not very difficult to get into the shoes of the single issue reading. Now, what I find to be very interesting about Usagi Yojimbo is that the way that it is paced seems perfect for the single issue form. Now, I don't mean this from the point of view of the monthly single issues, because Usagi Yojimbo wasn't published monthly. Again, because of the amount of work done by a single person, I think you get 3 issues a year, maximum 4 issues a year is the most probably. That's why it would take years to get to 28 issues. So the number of years and the number of issues aren't going to match up to a monthly Superman, Batman type of title. But as individual experiences in this form, they are superb, partly because of the thing that I was talking about earlier. Many of them are single one-shot stories that deepen your sense of knowledge of the world and the characters. There are 2-parters, so you've got a cliffhanger and then you've got a resolution. There are 3-parters that feel like a nice epic because it took that long to get, and you've got that chapter structure. But the way that Stan Sakai measures out the story, depending on whether it's a single issue story, whether it's a 2-parter or whether it's a 3-parter, is perfect. But the way he puts them in through the larger run is the larger pacing that I think really shines when you look at the single issues. And that's why I couldn't just talk about the single issue I love. I wanted to talk about the ones that come before it, because there is a larger pacing thing that sort of made itself evident to me when I was just talking about, one issue. So, what do we have in the chat just before I switch back? Right, so Highland G says, I often reread pages of comics that feel fast-paced, as I don't think I take them in first time. I find that easier than reading them slower for some reason. I think that's a really good point. I think a fast-paced page is supposed to be fast-paced. You're not supposed to read it slowly. You're supposed to scan over. And I think particularly when I was talking about Lone Wolf and Cub in my Lone Wolf and Cub video, that stands out to me as a comic that is meant to be read. I mean, again, depending on the story and the page, but much of it is meant to be read at an extremely high velocity, and you get that action. You're not supposed to be dwelling on this, but the art is therefore leaner. It's just a couple of strokes, because there isn't much to sit here and wallow in that one panel. It's to get that effect, is to feel the movement. So I do think that pacing will have to be getting the reader to move at the pace that you want them to move, but the reader also being willing to do that. So I think that's a good point, because it raises the question of, where does that disconnect happen? When do we think something is oddly paced? Is either I'm ahead of the story or I'm not quite with it. I'm off from whatever the authors want to do, and how much and how well they can hold your hand through it and not require you. So for that point, I would say that probably a fast-paced panel or a page that is supposed to be read fast shouldn't have stuff that is so full of detail that you want to stop and take a look at it and wallow in it, or come back to it. I mean, I guess you could hide an Easter egg or something like that, but I'm talking only about storytelling. I would say that probably the level of detail in a panel is about the pacing. You have less detail when you want the reader to go by quickly to the next one, and you have a lot of detail when you want them to stop and take it in. And that's why you can combine it with a splash or with a page turn. Is like, this is when, you know, Fawnbone comes over the mountain and sees the valley spread out in front of him. So take it in. Here's a lot of detail. Slow down, stop, and, you know, move along. Not much to see. That's really a part of comic spacing. Right. So Usagi Yojimbo in Mirage, number 9. How should I? All right, I'm going to get number 8 out anyway. Number 8 is a standalone story. It is about a gambler. Well, he's actually running a hustle. He's got a fighter and he takes bets. The fighter kills the person who's challenged him. He wins. It's a kind of setup that we have seen in other things before. It's really well set up over here because you immediately get a waste of a life and how little it matters to these two people. So you've got two reprehensible people right at the beginning. This is the gambler, the widow, and the ronin. And this story unfolds as a completely standalone story of these two who run this scam having a sort of falling out, or the guy who is not the fighter, the manager, he needs to get rid of this person because he's getting wise to him skimming off the top and things like that. But the whole point is it's saturated in this samurai lore. As soon as you start, it's Edo era Japan. You've got something that would fit obviously right into a Western. You've seen these things before. You've got duels, you've got honor, but you've actually got money grubbing stuff going on in the background. You've got a waitress who is a widow, and she recognizes this manager as being the person who managed the man who killed her husband. Not the person he's with now, someone before. That person was killed in a duel by our hero, Miyamoto Usagi. Now, that is just hinted at. Now, obviously, that's somewhere in the past. See Usagi Yojimbo number, etc. You'll get that little note, but you don't need to have read that. You're immediately filled in, but it's not a flashback that's taking you back there. You're getting new story. You're getting a new character you haven't seen before. You're getting her plight, but it connects to something that we as readers have seen. So if you're an old reader, you know, now I'm continuing with the widow of that person and there's significance to who Usagi kills, and because you've got a connection that you didn't know of before. The old reader is being rewarded. The new reader is being filled in. You've got this now leading to a conflict that gets Miyamoto Usagi involved again. This entire story has a very nice little twist in which, just because he is polite and he doesn't rise to the bait, he is misunderstood. Our hero is misunderstood as a weakling, and the bets go against him. He obviously wins the fight. No big deal. We know he's a hero. If this is the first time you're reading it, the effortlessness with which he dispatches him shows you how good he is at fighting, but his resistance to violence, his not wanting to fight, and him, you know, being honorable rather than egotistical is the other part of it. So within a few pages, him backing down from a fight, him being cornered into the fight and winning it, you've got Miyamoto Usagi. Your first comic you've ever read, you know who this character is. You know how honorable he is. You know how badass he is. You know he's got a violent history. You know his violence has consequences. There are other family members who are touched by these things. You've got this entire world of honor and racketeering and villages. All of these things just crammed into this one little dual story, in which after he walks away, the manager is poisoned in revenge by the wife. Miyamoto Usagi is not even part of the climax of that story. So again, within a very small story, a lot of character work, a lot of action, a lot of information given to you about background and how people live and all of those things, and a very good character play as well. and that's just 20 pages of the comic. So great standalone story, great introduction. Here's a backup. The backup is part 3. So this story is continuing and has been continuing for wherever the backups were, not even necessarily in 7 or 6 if they were longer stories or they had different backups. But now you're getting a part 3 story for a new reader. They know they're coming into the middle of something. Unlike this, this is something directly linked to what has happened before. But you have a little bit of a flashback narration. This is young Usagi. And now you also understand that your backup stories can be flashbacks. So therefore, you are learning about the character's childhood while you're seeing his adventures as an adult. So that's very cool in one comic, getting that view. You get this part 3, you understand what has happened. There's been a battle, there's a battlefield. This kid, Usagi, came in and took a sword from a body, a warrior's weapon. However, that's an extremely dishonorable thing to do, and he has been taught a lesson by his sensei, and he has come back to this battlefield to return the sword. And this story is the culmination of this anti-war, anti-glamour in war story that's been going on in Battlefields Part 1 and 2. And you get the culmination of it. The culmination of it is he is caught by guards who take him for a looter, and they will chop his hand off because that's what you do to looters on the battlefield. And he's trying to say that he has come back to return the sword. And obviously that's ridiculous. They don't want to hear it. And just when his hand is about to be cut off, 2 horsemen ride up. One of them, obviously a leader, who looks at him and says, "Let him go." And then when he's asked why, he says that he has spirit, and one day you may find yourself fighting alongside him. And then you see that this is Lord Mifune, who ended up being Miyamoto Usagi's lord until he died. And that's what made him a ronin, the death of Lord Mifune. And this is his first encounter with Lord Mifune. An incredibly powerful piece of lore for fans of Usagi, for people who've been reading it for all these years. For a new reader, this is the first encounter. Anything else you read after that, it makes complete sense. How elegantly this story works as a piece of powerful flashback that gives us something into a character we know and a relationship that we know meant so much to him, and the birth of it and the question of honor. But at the same time, it being a perfectly wonderful story about a child learning about honor, being shown mercy, understanding about the sword and the soul of the warrior. So much of these cultural and time and place markers that are wonderful to this series are exemplified in this one little volume with one standalone story and one part 3 of a flashback story. I mean, I don't know how well I can explain this, but something like that to me is electrifying because of the density with which it does it, but also the ease. It's so simple to read. It's so clean. It's so clear that you have no doubt what it is that you're reading and understanding what the story is about. But it's so deep because you have gotten so much about these characters. You've got so much about this world, and you've got so much into what makes them who they are before, after, through time in this one issue. So that's one of the reasons why I'd say that this is so perfectly paced as an issue. But of course, this has nothing to do with what I actually wanted to talk about, but it's just a great example of that. Now, issue number 9 starts with this 9-panel spread. Sorry, this 9-panel page. The 9-panel grid is it's a famous formal thing. We've seen it and heard it talked about in a number of things, most notably Watchmen, and then things that Tom King has worked on with various artists. But here you've got 9 panels. You've got background, close up on a footstep, background, trees, water, and this chase a very nice, dense little presentation of this kid running through the woods with shackles on his feet, if you notice that. You've got him tripping and falling, looking up, and our reveal, our hero, Miyamoto Usagi, pretty stern, badass expression on his face, but the kid recognizes him as not being one of the people chasing him, asks him for help. This is it. You've got 2 pages of this kid running. This is not where our hero is. This is where the reader is. We've got this situation. We're already sympathetic because we know this is a child. We know he's shackled, and we know that he's afraid. When our hero appears, if you're a new reader, you don't know who this guy is. That's a tough expression. But immediately you've got, you're not one of them. Help me. So this person's a hero no matter what, as far as this presentation is concerned. You see the bad guys who are chasing the kid, give him up. And then you've got the first words Usagi speaks, which is, I should put on my glasses. Where are they? There we go. Sorry. It says, this boy is shackled, but you aren't prison authorities. Who are you? Excellent introduction. I mean, of course, this is issue 11 in volume 2. Excellent. But the first time we're seeing him, the first words he's speaking, he's in shackles, but you don't look like prison authorities. There is suspicion. There is law-abiding thing. You get into, all right, you're going to get into a fight. Stay behind me, boy. Boom, boom, boom. They're gone. Guy with a thing, with a bow and arrow. The kid throws the stone, knocks him out, gets admiration from him. Quick action sequence, again, nothing. This is one panel for him to dispatch 3 people. This is how badass he is. We've seen this over and over again. These people are not a problem. He protected the kid. He immediately came to his rescue. Fantastic. And this is just 3 pages. Fantastic guy. He's our hero. You've got the kid can hold his own as well, knocks him out. And the admiration and the bond that forms between them doesn't need more than this. This is very quick, very lean, but also very rich. The kid tells him that he is hero from a village nearby. His father is the headman there, and he gets instructions on how to undo their belts and tie them up. There's information being exchanged in both ways, and there's information coming to the reader. The character is telling the character what the character doesn't know, so it's important, but he's also telling us that in the same go. We're getting more badassery from him. We are also getting the tying up of the things. We've also got that mentor protective thing coming into instructions already. Again, just one panel, one exchange of dialogue, and that's established. Now you have the flashback. This story is called Slavers. And what we have over here is the story of how these slavers came into this village, conned them into thinking that they would be there to protect them, got them to build a barricade, and turned out to be the very bandits that the villagers were trying to protect themselves against. So you've got a bunch of people who are now holding this entire village hostage for the harvest. And once the harvest is done, they will kill everyone in the village and take off with the harvest to sell. This information is given to us in text because it's being narrated, and therefore we've got these desaturated panels which obviously tell us that it's a different sort of timeline, but again, they're not too crammed full of stuff. They've got exactly what complements the larger story. You've got a presentation of these bad guys, their faces, and then you've got the escape, which brings us back in over here. It's pretty seamlessly done. It's very quick. It's very efficient. And now we've got the hook for our story. We've got an entire village that has until the harvest, until, or they're dead. The first thing that Miyamoto Usagi does is he thinks that after the harvest, the gang will have no reason to keep the villagers alive. And he says, how far away is the harvest? It's any day now. And he sends the kid off to get help. And that's an interesting thing because it's not like he's going to be able to take on an entire band of slavers by himself, people who've got a barricaded village, but he sends them for help and he sets off for the village on his own. He gets to the village. He's met with suspicion. He says, I heard there were jobs here. They said, you heard wrong, go away. And then he beats them up without taking his swords out of his scabbard, which is kind of a traditional thing that he does when he doesn't want to kill people, but just knock them out. It's something that we see in samurai stories also when the expert who wants to teach the whippersnappers a lesson. You bonk them over the head or punch them in the stomach with that. He dispatches of them very easily and says, take me to your leader. It's taken to the leader. The leader is very suspicious. This is also good. It's not condescending. It's not like you come in here and say, hey, I heard there were jobs here. I'm looking for work, and you'll get accepted. The suspicion of the leader, you only need that one narrowing eyes panel. That's all. You've got this story moving along, but you've got your pieces not quite... you're not sure that our hero is in a good place because you don't think this guy's buying it. But he goes on to say, all right, where is... he finds the village headman, who is the child's father, Hiro's father. He goes and pretends to beat him up while whispering to him. So you've got those little whispers and you've got the louder words. So he's speaking, again, to two people at the same time. He's speaking to the gods, so they think that he is bullying this guy. And he's speaking to this guy, telling him, you know, your son has sent me, and tells him the little example that his son told him would be, you know, proof that you know me. He says, get your guys together. We're going to get out of here. I need your help. So they've made this plan in which they're going to get away from here. But the plan gets foiled because one of the people that Usagi didn't kill and just tied up and left has escaped, come back, and warned the boss that this guy is not who he says it is. Then we get a fight sequence. And here, this fight sequence goes unlike many other fight sequences because he gets overwhelmed. But we understand why, because there's a quick thought bubble in which he is, I have to get outside. It's too crowded in here. So he's definitely a warrior who can take on people, but he can't do the impossible. And because he's crammed in over here, he gets knocked out, he gets captured, and then he gets thrown in front of the headman and the villagers to say, your hero is here. And that's where you get the to be continued. So this story ends on a cliffhanger with Usagi immediately jumping in to save this little kid, finding his way into the village, not being, not being accepted, trying to make a plan, but then having it gone. And oh, this guy says that I killed the kid. Now, as a reader, I don't think you believe it necessarily. You know, also, since he's been captured, and this is Stan Sakai playing with your story knowledge. He's not going to pretend as if these things are not familiar to a certain extent, but the speed at which he moves it, without wallowing in things as if you've never seen it before. You've got enough. You know that Usagi has been captured. You know that he's got to have to find his way out. But if you don't believe the kid has been killed, because this guy doesn't seem very competent, you feel that that might be some part of the next story. But you'll have to wait and see what happens. So you've got another backup over here, but this is a Nilsson ground thumper backup, also by Stan Sakai, but unrelated to Usagi Yojimbo. So that is issue number 9. Then we get to issue number 10. With the cover, we see that he's captured. We know that he's captured, and he starts with a full page splash of him upside down in water, drowning. This is a torture sequence that you know immediately. Now, what if you'd not read the previous issue and this was the first issue you were picking up? That's okay. You've got it right here from the cover and that's your setup. You don't need more than that. Someone is captured and being tortured. You know, if you've read the previous issue at least, that it's him. And you've got this, I'm not talking much about the panel structure here because I'm talking about the pacing issue to issue, but you can see the way that time is moving. This is a moment by moment, him coming to drowning, almost unconsciousness, being pulled up at the last minute, him being pulled outside. He has been beaten up and tortured, and he's being made an example of in front of the entire village. This entire sequence goes on for a while, in which he is just tied up, being beaten, being taunted, and being told what's going to happen to everyone around him. we've gotten to this point. The noonday sun is high. The people who have been captured are talking amongst themselves, but they don't really have an option now that the person who was supposed to rescue them has been captured. We find out, as we knew that we would, that the kid hero is still alive. At night, with Usagi just hanging there in front of the guard, you get the little callback of him being so good with his rock throwing that he knocks this person out and he comes and gets Usagi. This entire part is completely anti Usagi. There is no heroics, there is no great escape, martial arts, clever trick. He has been found out, he has been captured, and he's being rescued. This is one of the interesting twists that this series keeps throwing at us. As great and as fantastic as Miyamoto Usagi is, he isn't superhuman, and he will often rely on his friends and sometimes sheer luck and a gamble in order to get away with his life. And in this case, it seems to be that way again, where this kid comes back to return the favor to the person who had come to help him and come to help his village. He frees Miyamoto Usagi, who then listens to his flashback story, very quickly told about how he survived, and that's why he was lying on a cliff and he thought he was dead, so on and so forth. And in the night, they find the other prisoners. They knock out one guard, and then they talk to the prisoners about what they need to do. And this whole issue so far, except for a couple of little knockouts, has had almost no action in the traditional sense. Compared to number 8 and number 9, which had a lot of sword fighting and a lot of tension and a lot of... This has been a much slower burn, one of rescue and one of inspiration, because it's his presence that inspires people to come together and then in the morning attack the bandits. And that's really what wins them the thing, where everyone stands up for themselves, with Usagi serving as the person who inspired them. Then we get our really good fight sequence. We've got the end of most of these bandits, but a bunch of them get away, and that the village has been rescued. Usagi is hurt, but he's not going to stay. And they said, you need to rest and heal. He said, no, but he still has my swords, because when he got captured, his swords were taken away. But the story is over. Issues 9 and 10, Slavers and Slavers Part 2, is done. Now, you had a standalone story take place, but you've got an additional hook going. You now know that Usagi has lost his swords and he needs to continue chasing them. The story of this village and hero and his father may be done, but I need to go on to that next one, even though I have had my 2-story fill. So whether I had my first story, which was a standalone, but had part 1, part 2, part 3 of the backups serving as continuity, or whether you have the 2 linked parts serving as continuity in this action and then less action until it explodes into action story, and then you've got end of a 2-point arc, but let's go on to 11 to see where he goes next and what he's doing next. So this is... I saw someone advising someone to hydrate, and it reminded me. So this is just my simple way of showing how easy it is to read this series, how accessible it is, but at the same time, how deep it is. But what I really liked is how deep it is for the old reader and the new reader alike, but in different ways. When it is filling in for you lore and history, it's one thing. When it's giving you more of someone you already know, it's one thing. But when it's giving you someone you're just meeting for the first time, it's equally comprehensive, just in a different way. It's the same words and it's the same art and it's the same scenes that are doing both of those things, both pushing the story forward, increasing your knowledge of something, and introducing you and giving you a good time the first time you're introduced to something. That leanness and that dual storytelling is what works so terrifically for me. So moving on to number 11. And really, for me, number 11 is one of my favorite comics, favorite single issues of all time for a whole bunch of different reasons. But primarily because it is because of the way it continues as a single issue and stands alone as a single issue, the same thing that I'm talking about. And that's something that I've talked about with a number of the single issues I love. Obviously the Karl Barks story, most of them are just single issues that can stand, but whether it's the Astro City comic or whether it's the Animal Man comic, they serve really well as standalone single reads, and they serve really well into the larger storytelling of the series and establishing that tone or the nature of that particular writer artist's attempt at that series. And I think Usagi Yojimbo number 11 works that way phenomenally, because we've seen the more sort of traditional, if you can call it that, approaches in these issues and stories. But the beginning of Usagi Yojimbo number 11 is quite unlike that. What we start with is there are two kinds of iron ore, mind ore and sand ore. And then it tells you about iron ore, that is sand ore, which is much finer, much purer than mind ore, but it needs to be mixed in order to make weapons. So therefore, plain iron makes poor weapons because they will bend, and so therefore carbon must be added. So charcoal is made. So we started with iron ore, then we get to how charcoal is made. A huge pit is dug, and you're getting this little narrative of, well, I mean, history. I mean, it's a historical thing. You can tell it's a period thing from the costumes and from what's being talked about is digging the pit to make the charcoal. Vents are being put on the pit. Then around the clock for a whole month, the laborers pump the bellows that feed the fiery dragon underneath the surface. So there's the underground bellows in which this is being made. Then you get to creating a sword is a religious act, and so the workshop is purified before the new metal is brought in. Then the metal is being brought in. Then the bits of metal are fused together, and they are hammered and folded again. You've been getting these short little things, and then you get this large panel in which you've got all of these people working on that same piece of metal. This man is holding the metal. There's one hammer here, one hammer here, one hammer here. So there are three people hammering the metal. And then you've got this page with not 9, but 12 panels in quick succession showing you that metal being hammered, where hammering elongates the metal. You brush things away, you fold it on itself. And this, I love this detail of how that original size is folded on itself, where you've got an axe that's being put on that bar of metal right there. And that axe is hammered to create this seam. Then the seam is pushed over the edge of this anvil and bent downwards and then bent over. So that little square box closes. Then it's hammered on again until it's folded in and flattened out to make this, and then folded over and over again. This entire sequence of that metal being folded on itself, hammered, sliced, folded, hammered, sliced. You know, even though you're seeing it only once, because of the text, you know this is happening over and over again. The way that the laboriousness and the amount of effort on this is clear to you, even though it's presented only once, you know that this is a cycle. You get right to the end, and then you say, the last three actually create this thing as a loop, because it says there are three kinds of steel required for a sword. The hardest steel for the edge will be folded 15 times. So you're seeing this thing now 15 times for the edge, making more than 32,000 layers. The soft steel for the shock-absorbing core will be folded 5 times. So now you see this 5 times. And the medium hard folded 10 times. Not only do I get this loop, now I have a lot of knowledge about the edge of a sword being strong and the core of a sword being shock absorbing and the thing in between them being the medium transition. The information that I have gotten isn't just about this, it's a larger, and I mean, to say cultural is kind of like a weird word, but yes, this is Japanese sword making at a particular point of time, and you are in no doubt of the intricacy and of the craft and of the labor that's going into just folding this metal over and over again into different strengths to create a weapon. So that is your first page, the sand ore, the making of the charcoal, and the forging of the metal in an underground thing. Your next two pages are about hammering that metal into a blade with an edge, a soft core, and a medium in between. Then we have the forging must be just right, not enough heat, and it won't be hard enough. Too much heat, and it'll become brittle. Then you've got scraping. The sword is almost finished. The edge is hardened, and that is the sacred part of the process. And now you've got this 9-panel layout, but you've got bleeding between them, like this panel becoming 2. So now this thing, which was a hammering a repetitive action over and over again, has now gone into this smooth linear process. We can feel the sword being forged just by the descriptions on the panels. Then a prayer is said, and it's plunged into water, and you've got a fine blade. But it's not over yet. After the blade is signed, and that's another thing I learned, that, oh, that's called signing a blade, when you push it into the water and, you finalize it. After that, it is sent to a polisher for final shaping and to correct any imperfections. This is called, he is the honing master. So we have seen now how many hands and how many people it's taking to get this blade ready. The honing master uses whetstone blocks of successive fineness, so kind of like sandpaper on wood, of finer and finer to get this sword polished up until, and now you've got the sensei, the sword maker, who's like, that is a fine weapon. He says, a weapon? No, it is a samurai's soul. I mean, it's dramatic, but this drama is not just coming because he has said this word. This drama is coming from what we have seen already in order to create this blade. And now, once this blade has been made, you get to this part of the story, which is the next day. Master, a samurai has come from our lord, and he wishes to purchase a daisho. And here you've got little translations. Let me see if I can do this focus thing. Focus. Oh, there we go. And you have the first. There we go. And then you have someone visiting to come and buy this sword, the daisho. And over here, you've got the sword master refusing. He says, you misunderstand my skill. I may be a mere artisan, but I create souls. So him insisting that this is a soul irritates this person. It says, no one speaks to me like that. He says, I am adamant I have no swords for you. He glares at him. He glares back. You get this tense scene in which he refuses to sell the sword to this person who is all about how strong he is and how powerful he is. And then his assistant says, oh, we could have made a lot of money there. And he says, I'm not a merchant who counts his coins. The sword epitomizes the very spirit of the samurai class. All of this is just coming to us from him. His insistence on the soul being the sword, being the soul. It's not the person who came to buy the sword. And then you get more people who are coming to buy the sword. And they all flash, in one panel each. This is the one scene that establishes what he wants and how he thinks and what he feels. You don't need that repeated. You just get that quick flash, something that we see, as a montage of different people irritated, angry, really chagrined that he will not sell his sword to them until, and then you have a young boy brought by his father, and he says, my son is almost 15. He seeks his swords as he will receive his top knot soon. And he says, what do you say? And he says, I am untried, but I will strive to be worthy of the blades. And now you get another 3-panel thing, but this time it is not a flash of all the rejections. You get the smile and the acceptance. And then you know that he has found the right person for the swords, for the sword that he made, doing all of this. This is, I think, about half the issue right here that you've been reading about all this. And then you turn the page, 300 years later. Where are my swords? This is one of my favorite page turns of all time. I know this is coming. I know this is coming because number 10 ended with him saying, I'm going after my swords. But this is not only not what I was expecting when I wanted to continue from this, this I don't think is something anyone was expecting. And I don't think that this page, the whole point of this spread, the whole point of this Where Are My Swords is made by the fact that Stan Sakai decided to pace his story this way. He decided that this is going to tell you what these swords mean physically and what they mean spiritually. And then he's going to say 300 years later, flash forward. So now we know exactly when all of this was taking place. 300 years before the Edo period that we are with Miyamoto Usagi. Where are my swords? Look out, he's a madman. I love it. And I think this kind of storytelling is fantastic. It tells you that the expectations that we have of how a story needs to be paced is all about what it delivers to us, not our expectations ahead of time, but why would something matter. This is a very cinematic opening. This is something we've definitely seen in movies and things like that before, and I think Stan Sakai would use this kind of opening very famously in Grasscutter, where the epic story starts with just a creation myth. And it talks about the creation of all of these things, including this weapon. And then you come into, I think he's playing a flute. I'm not sure if that's one of them. But then you come to Miyamoto Usagi and who's walking down a road. And you get that incredible introduction. And I think this is a precursor to that. There is a lot of cultural context, history, and richness in this series. And very often they're given to us in the comic by having Miyamoto Usagi encounter them. He travels to a village in which he meets a seaweed fisherman. He goes to a town in which someone makes soy sauce. There are things that we learn about the Kite Festival because of his travels. But this is completely out of context. This is for the reader in a way that it's known to him. He already knows. He already has a value for it. And I think the way that as a standalone issue, this begins and launches us into the story is just magnificent. I haven't seen anything that has the same impact on me, where I have just this wide grin on my face, but I also have this incredible sense of satisfaction, of understanding, of knowing what's going on over here with a depth that I wouldn't if it was just about a samurai is looking to get his swords back. And that's that's really what makes this such an interesting and such a fascinating comic. So I guess that's really what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about how wonderfully this comic is able to bridge that kind of longer form storytelling and the shorter pieces, because there isn't really a short piece. They're all part of the longer piece. They're all part of the larger story. When I was thinking about number 11, the reason I also wanted to talk about number 8 in, other than that little structure it has, is because of that Battlefield Part 3 story, or the Battlefield story. It's not just about Usagi meeting Lord Mifune as a child. it's about the sword, it's about the honor, and it's about why looters, have their hands chopped off, and how dishonorable an act it is, and what a warrior. So we've got that stuff. We've got that as a learning that young Usagi had 3 or 4 issues ago. Then we get this history of these swords, of these particular swords that were given to him. Long-term viewers, long-term readers of the series know that the swords that Usagi carries were given to him by Lord Mifune. You also now can make that connection that this kid, this royal prince who got these swords 300 years ago, was an ancestor of Lord Mifune's, and this has been passed down for 300 years in their family and then was given to Miyamoto Usagi. You make this larger connection without it being spelled out for you, just because each of these little individual pieces that you have received in all of these issues and stories through the years, they all fit together, and they all fit together incredibly, because that depth is a constant, it's a constantly increasing depth, and that's one of the things that I find Usagi Yojimbo to be fantastic at, is to say, you've seen a lot of this before, but I'm going to give you even more depth. I'm going to get you to understand even more about the story, but do it so economically where it doesn't feel like you're spinning your wheels, it doesn't feel like you're just repeating yourself, and it doesn't feel as if you've left people behind, except for the most fanatical of followers, people who've been watching and listening to every detail. I think these days what happens is density becomes a shorthand for like good writing. Like the more dense it is and the more packed in with things it is, the greater the writing. And I can understand why, but I do think that over there we end up with a lot of things crammed and jammed at us, because you'll go online and look it up, or you'll pause and rewind and watch it over and over again, or you'll watch a YouTube video which will explain everything for you. The reading itself has a whole bunch of other reading that's going to come alongside it in order to unpack that density, and that's fine. That's one way of reading. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I love seeing this kind of elegant storytelling which says density is a mosaic rather than a concentration in one place, where I can create density through multiple examples of consistent simplicity. And I don't think that anyone does it better or has done it better than Stan Sakai with Usagi Yojimbo. So that was issues 8, 9, 10, and 11 of the Mirage comics. It's a very good run at Mirage, in spite of it starting with a TMNT crossover. Even the TMNT crossover is very good. But when you get to these parts, I think you know that this is a great series. I think it hits its stride. I think it probably hit its stride towards the end of the Fantagraphics run anyway, but it definitely hits its stride in the Mirage years and doesn't look back from there. So I'm excited to read more Usagi Yojimbo, but I hope you enjoyed this quick look. I'm out of bat. No, I'm not out of batteries. I'm actually doing pretty well. Let's see. Are there any questions that? Well, I've missed a whole bunch of comments. Oh, it's great to see so many comments. What is the best format to start reading, collecting Usagi Yojimbo? As I was saying at the beginning, in any format you can get your hands on. Anything you find that's cheap, anything that's in the library, anything that, a friend is selling, anything you can borrow, anything you pick up is good enough, I would say. I don't think you need to be a completionist. If you can start with volume 1 and find it and read it, read the Fantagraphics collection, of course, nothing like it. But Usagi Yojimbo isn't the best at the beginning, and that's fine, and that's true for a lot of long-running series. There's nothing wrong with the stuff at the start. It's stuff later makes the stuff at the start look very basic in comparison to itself, but it's very consistently the same people, it's very consistently the same world. So if you can start at the very beginning, do. The other thing that I'd said is, if you want to start with, I think the Usagi Yojimbo Saga Volume 1 is easily available, I would say this is a great place to start. Good value for money as well. You get a lot of stories, and they're great years. So they start with the Mirage years. The Fantagraphics slipcase, I think, is a little harder to get your hands on, but it was reprinted, and it might be available. There are trade paperbacks and trade hardcovers of Usagi Yojimbo, but the ones from Fantagraphics and even some of the ones from Dark Horse are pretty hard to get. I know the recolored trades like Origins, etc., are coming out from IDW. So there are a number of different places one can start. I would honestly just say what I just did. Anything that works, anything you can find, anything that is available. Economy of information. Yes, exactly. I love economy. And by economy, I don't mean that you've got to have a minimal approach. I want it to be, let's say, efficient. So you can have a lot of stuff, but if you're getting 10 times across what you're putting in, that's good efficiency. That's good economy. So I think for the amount you get, it's fantastic. Self-contained shorter stories are rare to come by now. I'm not sure. I don't read. There are people in this chat whose videos and channels I watch because they give me an insight into the view of the monthly singles. As I said, that's not my way of reading, so I don't know if standalone issues and one-shots are there. But I've seen things like a lot of Ice Cream Man was a series that I recently read that I really thought worked on an issue-by-issue level, especially at the beginning. So there are anthology series, but this is different. I think Usagi Yojimbo is a little different from anthology series. It's like a classic TV show where you have episodes and the episodes are full, and at the same time it's also building towards something. So I don't know if there are like great classic TV shows that did that, but I know that was there in superhero comics, but I don't know if it's there these days where every issue of something like the Teen Titans I was talking about, a lot of the Teen Titans in the 80s you could just read as standalone issues or maybe two-parters. Maybe those things are not common. I don't know. Usagi it still does it. I've been reading some of the new IDW stuff. You get 3-part story to begin with, but then you have a standalone. It works that way. Floppies are just generally harder to get in India. And trying to get exactly the ones you want is always going to be difficult. Although, as I showed in one of my live streams, I do know people who have been able to pick up Usagi Yojimbo floppies on the footpath stalls of Bombay. So you never know. Pick up one of the recent color trades from IDW would be a great suggestion. I agree with Sleepy Reader over there. The Fantagraphics editions are before, but it's harder to get the Fantagraphics volumes, I think. The Saga volumes are definitely bang for your buck for the number of stories that you get. Sorry, I'm behind. I've scrolled up to the chat, so I don't know if someone's saying something down below. All right, I think. Are the Origins paperbacks that are coming out picking up from the very beginning, or is it the same as this? No, the Origins are from the very beginning. So I believe they're not doing everything, but Samurai and Ronin, which were the first 2 trade paperbacks of the Fantagraphic stuff, I think they have been brought out in the Origins paperbacks. I could be wrong because I don't have the Origins paperbacks. I have... No, I have one, yes. So Samurai came out as Origins. I don't know if Ronin did, but if it's Samurai and Ronin, then I think it's the Wanderer's Road. So those would be the first 3 volumes. Maybe they've done it in that order and they're being comprehensive, but I know that in the single issues, they were leaping over things because they were already at the Dragon conspiracy. Usagi compares to Asterix in its self-contained, but I think Asterix is also. I think Asterix I think of as much more episodic and much more self-contained. I'm not sure if there are inconsistencies, but there isn't really a lot of story moving forward. But I think that same, yeah, that could be maybe said for Usagi. You do have a couple of very big things take place, but after them, things just kind of reset. And I think one of the interesting things about Usagi Yojimbo is how much he, as a character, is all about the reset, because he often finds himself in places where he could just settle down, or he could just do a different thing, or he could just do this one thing. And there are a lot of characters, strong, independent female characters, who are like, hey, you should hang out with me and we would do this together. And he always resets and puts himself back on the road and starts doing the same thing over again, because what he's looking for and his spirit is very different from that. So that's an interesting way in which Stan Sakai has been able to take the character and create that character's motivation as a reason why the story is such a familiar cycle of, I don't want to say sameness because it sounds bad, but because you have that wanderer, because you have that road, journeyer. But unlike, say, someone like Ogami Ito in Lone Wolf and Cub, he had a very particular mission in mind. Even though he was on the road, he had revenge on his mind, and that's one thing he needed to get. There are aspects of that in Usagi Yojimbo, the series, but it's never at the forefront, and it's never the driving motivation. Sometimes the driving motivation just seems to be he likes to wander and he likes to get involved in things, especially when there's an underdog involved. So that part of it is always going to be the case. So I think that's one of the things that makes it so inviting to new readers, is because no matter when you come in, even if something has happened, he's sort of reset himself back on the road. So he's going to have another adventure. He's going to have another couple of encounters, and then he's going to put himself back on the road. So I'd be interested in seeing, hopefully not soon, but I'd be interested in seeing how Stan Sakai decides to end the series. I don't know how many spoilers I want to get into, because there are obviously, there's a series called Space Usagi, which is a spin-off, and it's set in the distant future, and it's a science fiction thing. I think a lot of the Netflix show is kind of, at least in part, based on or borrowing from Space Usagi. So there's that. And then there is also a sort of 10 years forward or 15 years forward, because the 33 years of the comic series hasn't been 33 years in Usagi Yojimbo's life, of course. Time moves a lot slower in these comics. We are getting a lot of these stories slowly, but, it's only been a couple of days since that last thing, and it might have been months or even years for us. So time moves slowly, but there's also been stories that are non-canonical, and then there are stories that are, if you want them to be, they could be canonical. So they give you some indications of things that happen, because when you're obviously many, many years in the future, and they're talking about Miyamoto Usagi, who lived thousands of years ago, they'll tell you some things. But I'd still like to see what Stan Sakai creates as an ending for this series. I think, like other particularly because he's always been the writer and the artist and the letterer, and he's tried different things. He did one book that was all watercolors, but because of these things, I think I can't see Usagi Yojimbo being drawn and written by someone else. I don't usually have a problem with that with characters, and if someone did a fantastic job, I might come around to it. But I've seen a lot of the pin-ups that they include in these books, and the guest artists, not for stories, but for those drawings. And I see stuff online, and they all look really impressive, but I don't want to, it doesn't work for me. Usagi, I saw something which was an extremely cartoony version, not the chibi Usagi stuff, something. And that was one which was very Japanese art and watercolor influenced. That was one version that I thought, okay, if someone was doing Usagi Yojimbo continuing from Stan Sakai in that way, I would read it. But most of the others, and some of them my favorite writers, favorite artists doing works, and I'm just like, that looks great, but I don't want to see Usagi in that way. Senso Yeah, that's the one I was talking about. That's a little like 15 years or whatever, so somewhere in between the Usagi Yojimbo storyline and the Space Usagi storyline. Uh, Gru, yeah. Well, I mean, Stan Sakai's been the letterer for Gru ever since it's been there. So um, he's very closely involved with Aragonés and Evanier. Uh, and Gru shows up in Usagi Yojimbo. He's there in at least one street scene that I can think of. Um, I don't remember if Miyamoto Usagi ever shows up in Gru, but the lettering, and not just the lettering, of course, the one big common thing that I think Stan Sakai took from Gru, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he did, is the skulls as when a character dies within the speech bubble. That's a common thing that they have. That is a very cool way of showing. It's both cartoony and kind of gruesome, and it's kind of funny gruesome, but deaths being shown by that sort of expiry of breath in a word balloon, fantastic stuff. But that is something that grew. It wasn't the Peach Momoko stuff. It was something. It was somebody had shared something on Facebook. But yes, I love those. I love those little. Wait, does he kill someone in here? Let me see if I can find it. Oh yeah, there's a backup story with Jay, and no, I don't see one of those speech things. No killing. Well, maybe here in the duel. Sorry. Well, people who've read it know what I'm talking about. Either Gru or... yeah, there we go. There's something like that. Let me see. Right there. So when a character dies, they usually have some form of skull. And it gets funny sometimes where the skulls might be wearing the same helmet or things that they were wearing. But that's a signature thing with both Usagi Yojimbo and... there we go. Both Usagi Yojimbo and Gru. Gru Tarzan. I saw there was a Gru Tarzan crossover. I mean, I'm sure it'll be fun. I think. Who would I see Usagi crossover with? I mean, with the TMNT, I've read the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle crossovers that are written and drawn by Stan Sakai, and I think they're great and they're a lot of fun. And if you're not familiar, every time he encounters the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in the Usagi comics, they're a different Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like it's parallel dimensions or Spider-Verse type of things. So the four he meets are not the four he met before in some cases. And in some cases, in the early ones, he was just meeting one of them and then he got to meet all of them. But since then, every time he encounters them, it's not the same four. So it's interesting and it does different things. And I guess it might have to do with the incarnations of the turtles at that time in their comics. But I don't read the turtles, so I don't know. It's not the most obvious fit if you follow Usagi Yojimbo, because Usagi Yojimbo is very definitely a period piece. And although it is a fantasy, it's a much more mythology and that it's of its time and place. So Usagi traveling space-time and coming into our world, etc., is a little incongruous, and that's not really what I mean. I guess it might be a fun little thing, like it happens, but it's not really what the series is about. The series is much more like a sort of all ages lone wolf and cub with a little bit more, I think, richness to its tenderness. It's like that. It's very much a period piece. It's very much, as I was showing in that sword making chapter, it's very much about being steeped in that culture and that time that it's talking about. Usagi with Gru, I think there is an Usagi with Gru. I'm not sure though. I can't remember. All right. Well, that's what I had. I quick live stream. I think it might be my fastest live stream of all time. But yes, good. We should have those from time to time. I just wanted to get online and chat, as I was saying right at the beginning. I just wanted to get online and chat about comics and make sure that these cameras and this overhead thing is working and the audio stuff is working. I wasn't sure if it would, and if it would like do that little flip over and stuff like that. So I'm glad it's working. That's all I have for today. I'll be back hopefully with an edited video soon, but otherwise a live stream or two that I have planned coming up. But I never want to announce my plans because I never get to make them. So I'm hoping to have a little bit more free time in order to make videos. But until then, thanks so much for joining me on this video. This has been For the Love of Comics, and I will see you around. Bye.